It was just another day at school, but for Marcus, everything felt like it was about to change. He was used to keeping his head down. Marcus had always been a quiet kid, not because he lacked confidence, but because he had learned the value of staying out of the spotlight. His father, Vito Moretti, was a powerful and feared Mafia boss, a man who had built an empire in the criminal world. While Marcus admired his father, he didn't want to follow in his footsteps. He just wanted to live a normal life, away from the chaos that often followed his family's name. But life at an elite, predominantly white private school was far from normal. Marcus had always felt like an outsider. He was the only African-American student in his class, and he stood out for more than just his race. His father's reputation loomed over him, even though Marcus tried to keep it a secret. People didn't know the details, but they knew enough to treat him differently. Some were curious, some scared, and others were just plain rude. The bullies had started off small, with whispers behind his back and jokes he could ignore. But as the school year went on, they became bolder. It wasn't just kids in his class either. Some of the older students joined in. They'd say things to him in the hallways, mocking his father's wealth and influence. But Marcus had learned to let it slide. If he responded, it would only make things worse. He'd learned this from his father. The Moretti family didn't show weakness, and neither would he. His father had always told him, "No one can hurt you if you don't let them see it." Still, there were moments when Marcus wished he could fit in. He didn't want to be the target of every joke or the subject of every rumor, but his race and his father's name made that almost impossible. The bullying started to get worse. Sometimes it was just a few students shouting insults from across the hall. Other times, it was cruel pranks that left him embarrassed and isolated. Marcus tried to ignore it, but it hurt. No matter how much he pretended, it didn't bother him. He couldn't deny that it did. The worst part was the way people treated him, like he was somehow less than they were. They saw him as the Mafia boss's son, not as Marcus. To them, he wasn't a person. He was a symbol of something they didn't understand and feared. They mocked him, not just because of his family, but because of his race. He became the target of jokes that no one else would dare make. But he stayed quiet, hoping that if he didn't react, it would all go away. One day, as he walked through the hallway, he could feel the eyes on him. Some kids whispered as he passed by. "There he is, the son of the Mafia king," one of them muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. Marcus didn't stop or respond. He didn't even look at them. He kept his head down and walked past, trying to ignore the growing anger inside. But then, someone pushed him. It wasn't just a shove in the hallway, it was an act of aggression. A tall, broad student named Jeremy had decided to challenge him. "Where do you think you're going, Moretti?" Jeremy sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. He was a senior, popular, and untouchable. No one dared stand up to him. Marcus had seen this before, but today something was different. Jeremy didn't just push him, he mocked him. "What, you think you're too good for us because your daddy's some big shot?" he spat. Marcus froze. He didn't know what to do. All of his instincts told him to walk away, but Jeremy kept talking. His words hit harder than the shove. "You're just like the rest of them. You don't belong here." The mocking tone, the way he said "them," like Marcus wasn't even human, it was too much. For a split second, Marcus thought about how easy it would be to walk away, just as his father would have advised him to do. But something inside him snapped. He could feel the heat rising in his chest. He had always been taught to rise above, to be better than the people who tried to bring him down. But today, it felt like something had changed. His silence had only made them bolder, and he was tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Marcus didn't respond with anger or violence. He didn't need to. He just stared at Jeremy, his expression cold and unyielding. His silence spoke louder than any words could. Jeremy, sensing a shift, stepped back. The air between them felt thick, like something was about to happen. Jeremy, who had always been the bully, the king of the school, suddenly felt uneasy. But before either of them could speak again, a teacher appeared, interrupting the moment. Marcus walked away without looking back, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what had just happened, but something had changed in him. He realized that standing up for himself didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant showing that you were stronger than the people trying to bring you down. That moment marked the beginning of a change for Marcus. He couldn't keep letting the bullying go unchecked. The next time, things would be different. The next day at school, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. The events from yesterday had been so sudden, so different from anything he had experienced before. He had always been the quiet kid, the one who stayed under the radar. But after that confrontation with Jeremy, it felt like the whole school had been watching him. The whispers were louder today, the stares colder, and the tension thicker in the air. He knew something was about to change, but he wasn't sure if it would be for better or worse. Marcus entered the school gates, his mind racing. He was used to ignoring the taunts and slurs thrown his way, but yesterday felt like a turning point. It was as if the bullies had poked a sleeping bear, and Marcus wasn't sure if he would be able to keep ignoring them any longer. Jeremy had gone too far. The way he mocked him, the way he spoke about his father, something inside Marcus had broken. He had always respected his father's rules. Never draw attention, never let people see your weakness. But now, something inside him was ready to confront the world he had been trying so hard to avoid. As Marcus walked through the hallways, he couldn't help but notice the way people were acting around him. Some students avoided eye contact, as if they were too scared to even look at him. Others gave him strange looks, as though they were trying to figure out what had changed in him. Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, anger, and something else, something he couldn't quite identify. But most of all, he felt the weight of his father's legacy pressing down on him more than ever before. His father, Vito Moretti, had always told him, "The world is a place of power and respect. People will treat you how you let them." Vito had been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was like every word carried the weight of years of experience in the criminal world. Marcus had always tried to live by his father's advice, but now he realized how true it was. People had always treated him like he was untouchable, like he was a walking symbol of power, but that wasn't who he was. He was Marcus, the son of a Mafia boss, yes, but he was also his own person, someone who had the right to stand up for himself. It was lunchtime, and Marcus sat at his usual table in the cafeteria. He was surrounded by his usual group of quiet friends, all of them trying their best to avoid the chaos of high school life. They were an odd group, all of them used to being overlooked. But today, the silence felt heavier than usual. Marcus picked at his food, his mind elsewhere. He had been trying to ignore the whispers, trying to convince himself that he was just another student, just another face in the crowd. But the truth was, he was never going to be just another student. And after yesterday, he realized he didn't want to be. As he sat there, he felt a presence. Someone was standing near his table. Marcus didn't have to look up to know who it was. Jeremy had walked into the cafeteria with his usual swagger, flanked by his two friends. They were a terrifying trio, the kind of group that ruled the school with their size and attitude. Jeremy had always been the loudest, the one who had started the bullying, but today Marcus saw something different in his eyes. The usual cocky grin was gone, replaced by a look of uncertainty. Jeremy didn't speak at first. He just stood there, eyeing Marcus like a predator trying to figure out its prey. It was the first time Marcus had seen him without that smirk, the first time he had ever seen a crack in his armor. Jeremy's friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Marcus sat up straighter, his heart beating faster. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't going to let them see that. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jeremy spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Look, "I didn't mean to go too far yesterday," he said, his words careful, like he was testing the waters. I guess I didn't realize who I was messing with." Marcus didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure how to react. Was this an apology? Was Jeremy actually trying to make amends? It was hard to believe after everything he had said the day before, but the fact that Jeremy had come to him in the first place was a sign that something had shifted. Marcus had always been taught to stand his ground, to never let people walk all over him. But now he understood that standing his ground didn't always mean getting into a fight. Sometimes it meant showing the strength to walk away. Jeremy cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "I know my friends were wrong too," he added. "They just follow me, you know. I guess I didn't really think about how it felt for you." Marcus finally looked up, meeting Jeremy's gaze. The shift in power was clear. The bully who had once tormented him was now standing there, unsure of himself, unsure of what to do next. It was a strange feeling, watching Jeremy squirm. It wasn't about revenge for Marcus. It wasn't about making Jeremy feel the way he had felt. It was about respect. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus realized he had it. Without saying a word, Marcus stood up from his seat and walked away, leaving Jeremy and his friends behind. As he made his way to the exit, he felt something in him shift, a sense of empowerment he had never known before. The world hadn't changed, but he had. The bullying hadn't stopped yet, but Marcus had learned that he didn't need to let it define him. He didn't need to be the victim. He could choose how to respond. And for the first time, Marcus realized that standing up for himself didn't always require words or fists. Sometimes it was about taking control of the narrative and choosing who you wanted to be, no matter what anyone else thought. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He was Marcus, the son of a Mafia boss, yes, but he was also so much more. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a new sense of purpose. Yesterday's events had been a turning point, not just in how others saw him, but in how he saw himself. The encounter with Jeremy had left him thinking more deeply about his family, his father, and the legacy that had always loomed over him. As he got ready for school, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the right moment to embrace that legacy fully. He had spent so many years trying to hide it, trying to blend in with the crowd. But now he realized something important. His family's power wasn't something to hide from. It was something that had given him strength, something that had shaped him into who he was. Marcus's father, Vito Moretti, was a man who had built an empire on power, respect, and fear. He had risen from nothing to become one of the most feared mafia bosses in the world. But despite his ruthless business dealings and the darkness that followed him, Vito had always insisted that his son stay away from the family business. Marcus had respected that, keeping his distance from the dangerous world that had made his father the man he was. Vito had always told him, "You are not the Mafia, Marcus. You are your own man." But what his father never told him was that the lessons of power, respect, and resilience were embedded in Marcus's DNA. He had learned them without even realizing it. The truth was, Marcus had always carried a part of his father's world with him, even when he tried to ignore it. The quiet strength that his father exuded had been passed down to him, whether he liked it or not. And now, after facing the bullies and standing up to Jeremy, Marcus could finally see that. The Mafia's influence wasn't just about crime and fear. It was about understanding the world's complexities, knowing how to navigate it, and using your position wisely. His father had never wanted Marcus to become a mob boss. But maybe, just maybe, he had been preparing him for something greater all along. As Marcus arrived at school that morning, he felt a wave of recognition wash over him. The atmosphere was different today, more charged, more expectant. The school seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see how he would act next. The whispers were still there, but they had changed. They weren't mocking him as much as before. Now it was almost as if they were sizing him up, trying to figure out what kind of person he truly was. Marcus could feel the shift in the air, and he knew that whatever happened today, he couldn't just fade into the background anymore. The hallway was quieter than usual as he made his way to his first class. Some students nodded at him as he passed, while others quickly looked away. But Marcus didn't mind. The world had always been uncertain for him, a mix of respect and fear, admiration and disdain. But now he realized that he had the power to control that narrative. He didn't have to let people define him anymore. He could choose how to be seen, how to live his life. In his first class, Marcus tried to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept drifting back to the moment with Jeremy. There was something in that interaction that had shaken him, something deeper than just the bullying. He had realized that standing up to someone didn't always mean getting in their face or fighting back physically. It meant understanding the power dynamics, knowing when to speak, and just as importantly, when to stay silent. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, but now he understood it more clearly than ever. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and Marcus packed up his things, ready to head to lunch. As he walked through the hallways, his mind was still racing with thoughts of his family, his father, and the lessons he had learned from both. He didn't know exactly what was ahead, but he felt ready for whatever it was. He could feel the weight of his family's legacy, but instead of it being a burden, it felt like a source of strength. When he entered the cafeteria, he found his usual spot at the back of the room. His friends, who had always kept their distance from the drama, were already sitting there, their eyes flicking up as he took a seat. The moment he sat down, they fell silent. They weren't used to seeing Marcus so different. He wasn't the same quiet kid who had kept his head down. He had changed, and they could all sense it. "Something's different about you today," one of his friends, Danny, finally said, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced up, meeting Danny's eyes. "Yeah," he said simply. "Things have changed." His other friend, Mia, raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You've always been the quiet one. Is it because of what happened with Jeremy?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how to explain what he was feeling. "I don't know, it's just, I realize that I don't have to hide who I am. I don't have to pretend like I'm not part of something bigger." Mia and Danny exchanged glances, clearly unsure of where this conversation was going. "What do you mean, part of something bigger?" Danny asked cautiously. Marcus paused, looking around the room to make sure no one was listening in. "I mean my family," he said quietly. "I've spent my whole life trying to separate myself from what my dad does, from the world he's a part of. But now, I get it. He's taught me things without me even knowing it, about strength, about power, about respect." His friends were silent for a moment, processing what he had said. They had always known Marcus was different, but they had never understood just how much of his father's world he carried with him. It wasn't just about being the son of a Mafia boss. It was about understanding the game of life itself. "I'm not going to hide anymore," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I can be who I am and still make my own choices. I'm going to start owning my story." Danny and Mia exchanged uncertain glances, but they nodded in quiet support. "I get it," Mia said softly. "You're not just Marcus, the quiet kid anymore. You're Marcus, the guy who stands up for himself." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He had finally accepted the lessons of his father's world, and it felt freeing. He didn't have to fight battles the way others did. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone. All he had to do was be true to himself, and that, in itself, was more powerful than any fight he could ever have. As lunch ended, Marcus walked out of the cafeteria with his head held high. He wasn't just the son of Vito Moretti anymore. He was Marcus Moretti, a young man who had finally learned the value of embracing his identity and the strength that came with it. A bell rang, signaling the end of another day of classes. But for Marcus, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new. As he walked through the school hallways, he could feel the weight of yesterday's decision on his shoulders. It wasn't just about the shift in how he saw himself. It was about the impact he had on everyone around him. The school seemed to be watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Every step he took, he could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. Some were curious, others were uncertain, but all of them were keenly aware that something had changed in Marcus Moretti. As he made his way to the parking lot, Marcus found himself deep in thought. Yesterday, he had stood up to Jeremy, not with aggression, but with quiet strength. That single moment had marked the start of his journey, but he knew it wasn't enough. Standing up for himself was one thing, but how would he handle everything that would come next? How would he deal with the consequences of defying the bullying, of breaking away from the quiet, unnoticed role he had played in the school for so long? Marcus knew he couldn't just return to his old life. Things had already changed, and now he had to decide what kind of person he was going to be moving forward. He reached his car, a simple sedan that his father had insisted he drive as a way to blend in. Vito Moretti, his father, never wanted Marcus to have a flashy lifestyle or draw attention to himself. He had always been insistent that Marcus stay humble, even if the world around them was anything but. The Moretti family was powerful, but Vito had always made it clear that power wasn't something to flaunt. It was something to use when necessary, but it should never be used to intimidate or control people unnecessarily. Marcus had learned that lesson well, but now he understood something else. Power wasn't just about who you knew or what you could do. It was about how you carried yourself. It was about owning your space without needing to assert dominance over others. As he drove home, the familiar streets seemed different to him now. The world outside his window was the same, but his perspective had shifted. Marcus had never really understood his father's warnings about the world. Vito had always told him that people would use him, his name, his family's reputation, his connections, for their own gain. He had always told Marcus to be careful who he trusted, who he let into his life. But now Marcus understood that those warnings weren't just about protecting his family's secrets. They were about protecting himself, about understanding the weight of the name he carried and how the world viewed him. When he arrived home, the house felt quieter than usual. His father was out, likely handling business, but his mother was there, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She looked up when Marcus walked in, her eyes softening as she saw the expression on his face. She had always known there was more to Marcus than he let on, but she could see that today was different. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently, her voice full of concern. Marcus nodded slowly as he sat down across from her. He had never been one to talk much about his feelings, but something about today made him feel like he needed to share. "I stood up for myself today," he said quietly, "against Jeremy." His mother's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything immediately. She simply watched him, as if waiting for him to continue. Marcus could tell she was proud of him, but there was also a sadness in her eyes. She had always hoped he would avoid the kind of confrontation that their family's world often bred. She had always dreamed of a peaceful life for him, free from the complications of their criminal background. "I didn't get violent," Marcus added, almost as if to reassure her. I didn't let him push me around anymore. I didn't back down. I think it surprised him." His mother took a deep breath, her fingers tapping the rim of her teacup. "I'm proud of you, Marcus," she said softly, "but you need to be careful. You know how things can spiral when you stand your ground. People don't always respect strength the way you think they will. Sometimes they're just waiting for an excuse to bring you down." Marcus nodded. He knew what his mother meant. His father's world was full of people who respected power but feared it just as much. In the criminal world, power was everything, but it was also fragile. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and it could all come crashing down. He had been taught that by both his parents in different ways. His father had shown him the importance of control, of knowing when to act and when to hold back. His mother had taught him the importance of kindness, of showing empathy in a world that often lacked it. The combination of both lessons had shaped him, but now he had to find a balance between them. "I don't want to be like Dad," Marcus said suddenly, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't want to be feared. I don't want to control people. I just want respect." His mother looked at him, her eyes softening. She reached out and placed a hand on his. "You already have that, Marcus," she said. "You just have to recognize it in yourself. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Not to Jeremy, not to anyone else. The world will try to make you fit into a mold, but you don't have to let it." Marcus looked down at his hands, turning the words over in his mind. She was right. He had always felt the pressure to live up to his father's legacy, to meet the expectations placed on him by the Moretti name. But maybe that wasn't what mattered. Maybe, just maybe, it was about finding his own path, one that was true to who he really was, not to the expectations of others. That evening, as he sat at the kitchen, a table with his mother, Marcus realized something important. He didn't have to follow in his father's footsteps to be powerful. He didn't have to become the man his father had been. What he needed was to carve out his own identity, to build his own sense of respect on his own terms. And that was the kind of power that no one could take from him. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He would still face challenges, still have to confront people who tried to tear him down. But now, Marcus felt ready. He knew who he was, and he wasn't afraid to show it. With the lessons from both of his parents, he had the strength to face whatever came next, and to build a future where he was respected for who he truly was. The next few days at school felt like a delicate balancing act. Marcus was walking a fine line between showing strength and maintaining control. After the confrontation with Jeremy, things had calmed down for the most part. The whispers, the curious stares, and the sideways glances had not stopped, but they had shifted in tone. Instead of mocking him or treating him like an outsider, his classmates seemed to be watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Marcus had always been the quiet kid, the one who blended into the background. But now, the world was different. It wasn't just his schoolmates who were noticing him. Even the teachers seemed to look at him differently, like they were seeing something in him they hadn't before. He knew that his reputation was changing. He wasn't just Marcus Moretti, the son of a Mafia boss. Now, he was someone who had taken a stand, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for himself. But what came next? The question lingered in his mind. As he walked through the hallways, he couldn't help but wonder if he had really done the right thing. His decision to stand up to Jeremy had been impulsive, born out of frustration and a desire to stop being pushed around. But now that the dust had settled, he realized it wasn't just about him and Jeremy anymore. It was about the world he was a part of, the world his family had created, and how he fit into it. That afternoon, after school, Marcus made his way to his father's office, a place he had visited countless times, but had never felt entirely comfortable in. Vito Moretti's world was one of shadows, of deals made behind closed doors, and power exercised in the quiet corners of the city. His father had always kept his business separate from Marcus's life, ensuring that his son stayed away from the criminal side of things. But today, Marcus felt compelled to talk to him. As he walked into the office, the air felt heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Vito was sitting behind his large desk, the same imposing figure that Marcus had known his whole life. He looked up as Marcus entered, his face unreadable. "Marcus," Vito said, his voice calm but authoritative. "What's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "Dad, I stood up for myself," he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Against Jeremy. At school." Vito's eyes narrowed slightly, and Marcus could feel his father's attention sharpen. "I know," Vito said quietly. "I've heard the whispers. You did well." Marcus blinked, surprised by his father's words. He had expected Vito to lecture him, to tell him to stay away from confrontation. But his father's approval was unmistakable. "But I don't know," Marcus continued. "After it happened, I started thinking, is that who I am now? The guy who fights back when someone disrespects him?" Vito leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice low. "No one should ever disrespect you. And sometimes, showing strength is the only way to make that clear. But you need to understand something, Marcus. Fighting for the sake of fighting will only get you so far." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Vito's gaze was steady, as if he was seeing right through him. "People will always test you. That's a given. But strength isn't just about how you respond to them. It's about understanding the world, understanding when to fight and when to walk away. Power comes from knowing how to control yourself, not just how to control others." Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. His father had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, every word carried meaning. "I've been trying to avoid this world, Dad. I've been trying to stay out of it," Marcus confessed, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "But now, I don't know what to think. It's like the world is changing around me, and I can't hide from it anymore." Vito's eyes softened, and he stood up from his desk, walking around to where Marcus stood. "You're right," Vito said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The world changes. People change. But you are who you are, Marcus. You can't outrun your family, your legacy, but that doesn't mean you have to follow it exactly. You have your own path to walk. Just make sure you're walking it with your eyes open." Marcus took in his father's words, feeling the gravity of them settle over him. The path he had been walking had always been one of avoidance, one of trying to blend in. But now he realized it wasn't enough. The world wasn't going to let him hide anymore. And maybe he didn't want to hide. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to step into the world he had been born into and take control of it, on his terms. After their conversation, Marcus left his father's office with a new sense of clarity. He still didn't know exactly what the future held, but he felt ready to face it. He knew he couldn't keep running from who he was, from the legacy that had shaped him. But that didn't mean he had to let it define him. He had the power to write his own story, to carve out his own identity. Over the next few days, Marcus began to approach life with a new sense of confidence. He wasn't just the son of Vito Moretti anymore. He was as Marcus Moretti, a young man with his own dreams, his own choices, and his own path to follow. The world around him might still be watching, still waiting for him to slip up, but he wasn't afraid anymore. Jeremy and his friends continued to keep their distance, and Marcus felt the weight of their silent acknowledgement. The bullies had learned not to underestimate him. They had seen that he was no longer someone to be pushed around, and that realization had forced them to respect him. But Marcus knew that respect didn't come from fear. It came from the strength to stay true to yourself, even when the world tried to tear you down. The next time someone challenged him, Marcus was ready. He wasn't afraid to stand up for himself, but he wasn't going to let the world dictate who he was either. He would choose his battles, choose when to fight and when to walk away, and with each choice he would carve out his own identity, one step at a time. The world was changing, and so was he. But for the first time in his life, Marcus Moretti felt like he was in control. The days that followed were a strange mix of uncertainty and quiet confidence. Marcus had made a decision to no longer hide who he was, to no longer let the expectations of others define him. But now, he had to face the reality of living with that decision. Every step he took felt different, heavier somehow, as if the weight of his own choices was starting to settle on his shoulders. He had stepped out of the shadow of his father's legacy, but it wasn't as simple as just walking away. His father's name still carried weight, and Marcus couldn't escape it, no matter how hard he tried. That Friday, as Marcus walked through the school gates, he felt the same unease he had felt before, the feeling that something was about to shift. The world around him felt charged, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. The school had been buzzing with rumors, but this time it wasn't about him. It was about the growing tension between the students and the administration. The way his classmates had looked at him after the confrontation with Jeremy had changed. No longer did they see him as the quiet outsider. They saw him as someone who had the power to change things, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in. But with that power came expectations, and with those expectations came the weight of responsibility. Marcus knew that the moment he had stood up to Jeremy, he had crossed an invisible line. He had shown everyone, including himself, that he could stand tall in the face of adversity. But now, he had to keep that momentum going. He couldn't just stop there. He couldn't go back to being the kid who let everything slide. People were watching, waiting to see how he would handle what came next. That afternoon, as Marcus sat in the school courtyard, he watched the students around him, their conversations muted by the low hum of activity. It was as if they were all waiting for something to happen, as if the entire school was holding its breath. Marcus felt the tension in the air, and for the first time, he realized that it wasn't just about him. The world around him was changing too. People were beginning to recognize the power of standing up for yourself, of not letting the world walk all over you. They were seeing that power in Marcus, and that made him both a symbol and a target. He wasn't sure how he felt about being a symbol. He didn't want to be a hero or a martyr. He just wanted to live his life and make his own choices. But there was no escaping the fact that his actions had resonated with the people around him. He had become the embodiment of strength, the guy who had refused to be pushed around. And with that image came an inevitable shift in the dynamic of his school. As Marcus sat there, lost in thought, a voice broke through his reverie. It was Jeremy. The very same bully who had once tormented him now approached him with a hesitant look on his face. He wasn't alone this time. He was flanked by his friends, but there was something different about them today. They weren't the same cocky group they had been before. They seemed more subdued, like they were unsure of themselves for the first time. "Hey, Marcus," Jeremy said, his voice lacking the usual bravado. "Can we talk?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, not sure what to make of this sudden turn of events. "What about?" Jeremy glanced at his friends, who seemed just as uncomfortable as he did. "Look, we just wanted to apologize for everything. The insults, the bullying. We were wrong." Marcus studied them, his gaze cool, but not unkind. "You want to apologize now?" he asked, his voice calm. "After everything?" Jeremy shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to continue. "Yeah, I know it's too late for some things, but I've been thinking a lot. And I realize we pushed you too far. You didn't deserve that." Marcus sat silently for a moment, considering the sincerity in Jeremy's words. It was strange, this sudden shift in dynamic. The same kid who had once mocked him now seemed almost apologetic. It was clear that the power had shifted, but Marcus wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality. Should he accept the apology? Should he hold a grudge? "You're right," Marcus finally said, his voice steady. "I didn't deserve that. But neither did you. None of us do. We all have to deal with our own battles. But that doesn't mean we have to tear each other down in the process." Jeremy nodded, a faint look of relief crossing his face. "I get it. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Marcus didn't know what to say. This wasn't the outcome he had expected. It wasn't a big, dramatic confrontation. It was simple, quiet, and strangely dignified. But maybe that was what made it so significant. They didn't need to fight or shout at each other. They could just acknowledge the wrongs and move forward. "I appreciate you saying that," Marcus said, standing up, "but don't expect me to forget everything that happened. We all have to live with the choices we make, and so do you." Jeremy nodded again, his friends following suit. Without another word, they turned and walked away, leaving Marcus to reflect on the conversation. As he watched them leave, Marcus felt something inside him shift. He had always believed that standing up for himself meant confronting the problem head-on, but this had been different. This was a moment of understanding, a moment where both sides acknowledged the harm that had been done without further escalation. The conversation with Jeremy left Marcus with a lot to think about. His actions had had a ripple effect, and he realized that change wasn't just about fighting back against bullies or standing up for himself. It was about setting an example, about showing people that there was a better way to handle conflict. By not stooping to their level, by refusing to engage in the same toxic behavior, Marcus had shown Jeremy and the others that there was another way to respond to aggression. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if things would stay calm or if more challenges would arise. But for the first time, Marcus felt like he had a real sense of control over his life. He had made the decision to step out of the shadows, to stop hiding from who he was. And in doing so, he had shown the world and himself that he was capable of much more than anyone had ever given him credit for. As the school bell rang to signal the end of the day, Marcus walked out into the fading light of the afternoon, his steps more confident than they had ever been. He wasn't just walking away from the schoolyard battles of the past. He was walking into a new chapter of his life, one where he could stand tall, face whatever came his way, and continue to carve out his own path, on his own terms. The storm that had once seemed so inevitable now felt like something he could weather with his head held high. The weeks that followed the conversation with Jeremy were quieter than Marcus had expected, but in a way, that made them feel even more tense. He was still adjusting to the shift in how people treated him at school. His classmates now looked at him with a mix of respect and curiosity. The whispers had faded, but the weight of their gazes remained. It was as though his entire school had suddenly become a chessboard, and Marcus was now a piece that everyone was watching closely. The power dynamics had shifted, and Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of having to navigate this new world carefully. But the world wasn't just changing at school. Marcus began to notice it at home too. His father, Vito Moretti, had always kept his business dealings separate from Marcus's life, but now Marcus couldn't help but feel more connected to the legacy his father had built. Vito had always been a man of silence and authority, rarely showing emotion, except when it came to his family. But now, Marcus was starting to see a different side of him. A side that came from being the son of someone who controlled so much. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about understanding the weight that came with it, the responsibility, the choices that had to be made. One evening after dinner, Marcus sat down with his father in the living room. Vito was sitting in his usual chair, the same chair that had become a symbol of his dominance, his calm, calculating presence. Marcus stood in front of him, uncertain of what to say, but knowing that he needed to ask the questions that had been weighing on his mind. "Dad," Marcus began, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "Can we talk?" Vito looked up, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Oh, of course," he said. "What's on your mind?" Marcus hesitated. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what happened with Jeremy, about school, about us, and I'm starting to realize that there's a lot I didn't understand about this family, about you, about the world we're part of. I want to know what it really means to carry the Moretti name. I need to understand what that legacy truly is." Vito's expression remained unreadable, but Marcus could see the flicker of something in his father's eyes, perhaps pride, perhaps something else. After a long pause, Vito spoke. "It's not an easy thing, Marcus," he said slowly. "You've always been sheltered from the world I live in, from the choices I've had to make. And I've kept you away from that because I didn't want you to be burdened by it. But now, I see you're asking the right questions. You're ready to know what it means to carry this family's name. And that's not something to take lightly." Marcus swallowed, feeling the weight of his father's words. "I know it's not something to take lightly, but how do you know if you're making the right choices? I've always tried to stay out of it, but now I realize that avoiding it doesn't change anything. I can't keep running away from who I am." Vito leaned forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "You're right. You can't run away from it. The Moretti name is built on power, control, and respect. Those things are earned, not given. But the choices you make, Marcus, the way you carry yourself, that's what matters most. It's not about being ruthless. It's about understanding the weight of the responsibility that comes with this life." Marcus nodded, taking in his father's words. It was clear that Vito wasn't giving him answers as much as he was giving him the tools to understand the answers for himself. But there was something else in his father's voice, something that Marcus couldn't quite place. It was a mixture of caution and pride, as if his father was watching him closely, trying to gauge how far Marcus was willing to go. "I'm not asking you to follow in my footsteps," Vito continued. "I want you to find your own way, but remember, strength isn't just about fighting battles. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And if you want to be respected, Marcus, you have to show people that you're not afraid to make tough decisions. Sometimes that means showing mercy. Other times it means making enemies." Marcus sat back, his mind racing. It wasn't just about being strong, it was about being smart, about knowing when to act and when to hold back. And that thought was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time, he understood what his father had meant. It wasn't just about power, it was about control, not of others, but of oneself. The next few days at school were marked by an unsettling silence. The usual cliques and social circles had begun to shift. Students who had once ignored Marcus now seemed to be drawn to him, some out of genuine respect, others out of curiosity. It was like a silent game of chess, with Marcus as the central piece. He wasn't sure how to handle this newfound attention. It wasn't something he had asked for, but it was something he had to navigate. One afternoon during lunch, Marcus found himself sitting with a small group of students, people who had once stayed on the fringes of the social scene, just like him. There was a certain tension in the air as they talked, as if they were all trying to figure out where they stood in this new world that Marcus had unwittingly created. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. And that was the problem. Marcus didn't know what to do next. He didn't want to be the guy who commanded respect because of his father's name. He wanted to earn it on his own terms. But as the days went on, Marcus realized that respect wasn't something that could be demanded. It was something that had to be earned. Through actions, through integrity, and through the ability to navigate the complexities of human relationships.